All right. I have just a couple of other items for all of you at the top here. As part of the American Rescue Plan, today we announced an allocation of $21.6 billion in emergency rental assistance to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. This much-needed funding will help prevent evictions and ensure basic housing security for millions of Americans, including middle-class landlords who rely on rental income to support their families. In addition to the funding, the administration announced new updated guidance to make sure that these funds get out quickly to those most in need of assistance. For the first time, the new guidance requires the program to offer assistance directly to renters if landlords choose not to participate. The new guidance also cuts down wait time before renters can access assistance and makes clear that funds can be used for moving-related expenses, security deposits, and other costs if a family is displaced. While the economy continues to recover, nearly 7 million Americans reported being behind on rent in the second half of April. More than 40% of those renters worry that they could be evicted sometime in the next 2 months, and almost 12 million Americans lack confidence that they can meet next month's rent. So this is clearly critical to a large swath of people across the country. I have a little bit of a week ahead for you here, I believe. Well, we'll get it to you immediately following the briefing afterwards. Alex, you want to kick us off? Okay, go ahead, Steve. I like it. Well, Secretary Yellen, give her more than she needs. Go ahead.
Does the April jobs report affect how you approach the negotiations over the infrastructure plan?
Well, Steve, let me say first that when we give you the week ahead, some of the components in there will include a leadership meeting that will be happening next Wednesday that we announced last week, I believe. It feels like a long time ago. That will certainly be an opportunity to discuss the American Jobs Plan, discuss ways we can work together on putting people back to work. But we've always felt, as you heard Secretary Yellen convey, and as you heard the President say earlier today, that the road to recovery would be up and down, and that there would be, it was going to be important for us to put in place, pass a package, the American Rescue Plan, that addressed the crisis, that was meant to rescue the country and the economy, and that we needed to invest far more than that to get to the point of recovery. So, certainly our focus will be on working with Democrats and Republicans. That hasn't changed, to get that done as quickly as possible, hopefully in a bipartisan way.
And following up, is it time to reconsider encouraging people to stay home with unemployment benefits, given the rising in vaccination rates, the CDC guidance, this April job report?
Well, I would say that we're not encouraging, you mean in terms of CDC guidelines or in terms of supplying unemployment benefits?
Yes. Supplying unemployment benefits.
Well, let me first say, because there's been a little bit of confusion about this, that there are certain requirements. In order to receive any kind of unemployment benefit, claimants must be able, available, and actively seeking work. And workers are not permitted to refuse suitable work and continue to receive benefits. That all remains true, including under the Pandemic UI program. You're only allowed to refuse work and continue to receive benefits if you are sick with COVID, taking care of someone sick with COVID, or offered a job in an unsafe workplace. As the Secretary alluded to, there also continue to be challenges that are unique to this moment we're living through, including child care restraints, the fact that 2 million women are left the workforce, and that has an impact, of course, on people rejoining the workforce. But our view is that these benefits continue to provide necessary assistance to families, to people who are out of work, to address what remains a challenging point in our economy. Go ahead, Kelly.
Given the President's frequent encouragement that people get vaccinated, where do things stand as far as the President deciding whether or not he will mandate that federal employees must be vaccinated, or members of the military must be vaccinated, or would he work in conjunction with private sector employers who want to have those kinds of requirements for return to work?
Well, I wouldn't anticipate that we would be putting requirements on private sector companies, and I would expect that we would allow the space for for them to put those requirements in place themselves or decide what is best for their workforces. Obviously, I don't have any update. There's no new information I can provide on any requirements as it relates to federal employees, and certainly as it relates to the military, we would rely on the advice and guidance of the Secretary of Defense.
So that's not something that's kind of in the works to consider whether the president would have that kind of a requirement?
I don't have any update on that at this point in time.
Does the president have a reaction to the indictments of 4 former police officers in Minnesota related to the George Floyd case and civil rights allegations against them?
Well, obviously we have seen the reports and we are watching any follow-up closely, but we don't have any specific reaction to the legal actions that were announced today. I will say that, again, it's a reminder, as was the verdict in the Chauvin case just a few weeks ago, that there's still more that needs to be done. Well, that was a moment of justice, certainly, that it is just the beginning, and it's a reminder of the need to put police reform in place through our legislative process and put those reforms in place across the country.
Thank you, Jen. Secretary Yellen said that the recovery would be bumpy and there would be different factors every month that contribute to it. What factors do you think led to what happened last month and the numbers dropping from an average of 500,000 to just over half of that?
Well, as Secretary Yellen said, I like saying that since she was just here, we look at monthly averages. We don't, it's one of the reasons why we don't celebrate and bring champagne and balloons in when the numbers are far above expectations, is because we know that that we have to look across a span of time and not overanalyze one particular month. So we look at it as across the course of 3 months, there was an average of 500,000 jobs that were created. The prior administration created an average of 60,000 jobs per month. So that certainly is a positive trajectory. In our view, as we look at this report, it's just a reminder, and our biggest takeaway is that it's going to take time and effort to heal the economy. It emphasizes the steep climb out from this economic crisis and the fact that more is needed. We need to do more because recovery for some, even when there are very high jobs numbers, is not recovery for all. And we will continue to advocate for moving forward with the American Jobs Plan as a result.
Thank you. President Biden just said that he was confident that he would be meeting with Putin in June next month and suggested that it was only a matter of logistics, where and when the meeting will take place. Can you confirm that he will meet with Putin when he visits Europe next month?
There's not a meeting with the president locked in yet. Obviously, our president, invited him to participate in that meeting because he thinks it would be a good step forward in the relationship to de-escalate, to ensure we have a more stable relationship moving forward, but there's no meeting to confirm at this point in time.
So have the Russians not accepted? Have they accepted?
There's, as we said, when the president had the discussion with President Putin, it would then be at the point where it would be discussions at a staff level about what it might look like, where, the timing, the components of an agenda. Those are still ongoing.
And just one more on the voting laws that were passed in Texas and in Florida. Does the president have anything to say about these laws? And will he ask the Justice Department, or does he believe the Justice Department should intervene in any way to try to prevent the implementation of these laws?
Well, on the second question, he will leave that up to his Attorney General and leaders at the Justice Department. I will say the president's view, fact of the matter is that these laws make it harder to vote. That's not a good thing. And his view is that any law that passes across the country should make it easier to vote, should not place limitations on giving food or water to people in any capacity in the line, should not limit the number of mail ballots you can help others return, should not allow challenges to voters based on their address, even when they show up with that address on a photo ID. These are making it harder to vote, not easier, and that's a fundamental view for the president. There's obviously federal legislation at the federal level, I should say, that he strongly supports. These are not the only states, as you well know, Weijia, where there are efforts to make it more and more difficult to vote. So he will continue to redouble his efforts to move legislation forward with Congress. His overall view is there's no good reason to make it more difficult for people to exercise their right to vote across the country.
Thanks, Jen.
Go ahead.
So on expanded employment, there was talk of making those benefits permanent. Democrats had been talking about that in Congress. Has the latest jobs report impacted the way that the White House is looking at that possibility? And then can the president do anything to try to help pick up the pace of hiring? I mean, could you see a world in which he'd be talking to CEOs about raising their salaries, that kind of thing? Has he been looking at options?
Well, I will say first, one, the president supports an increase in the minimum wage. The president also believes and would love to see action in moving forward the American Jobs Plan by this summer, because he is the first to tell you that we need to do more, the economy needs more, American workers need more, obviously for the short term, but also the long term. And we know that the combination of the American Rescue Plan and the American Jobs Plan would have a large net positive benefit on bringing our workforce back in. And also, the American Families Plan would have a huge benefit in addressing some of the impacts of childcare on educational needs, on covering that is preventing women from rejoining the workforce. In terms of UI benefits, I know that a number of Democrats have talked about that in the past, and we're obviously in the discussion phase at a staff level and discussion with committees from senior leadership here with members and their staff. Next week, I expect we'll have a range of conversations up at the highest level on down, where those discussions will continue, and we'll see what they bring to the table as important priorities for them.
And then when it comes to the American Jobs Plan, how long do you see, or how quickly do you see that money sort of making an impact on an issue like child care? I mean, it's going to take a while for it to be implemented, that money to get out there. We likely won't see impacts until earliest next year, isn't that right?
Well, I think first the American Families Plan, which has the biggest components of the 5-year extension of the child tax credit. Obviously, there are still components of that are being implemented now from the American Rescue Plan, and other pieces are meant to have a longer-term benefit. You're right. They're not all meant to have an immediate benefit. They're meant to address and build us out of recovery over the long term. But certainly for the American Jobs Plan, there are efforts in there that we certainly would hope to be underway as quickly as possible and as quickly as they can be. I don't know that we have an assessment at this moment in time on kind of when the first project could start. It really depends on when a bill would pass.
And then one quick one on Russia. Secretary Blinken has warned Russia against sort of further aggression. That seems to run a little bit counter to President Biden saying he's still expecting a meeting with President Putin. So how does the White House and President Biden square having a meeting with Putin despite this aggression? And is there a point at which the meeting could be broken off if Russia doesn't listen to U.S. warnings?
Well, first I would say that it's a relationship where, while we feel we want to move toward a more predictable and stable relationship over the long term, we also are going to reserve our option of putting in place consequences if their actions warrant. And that was certainly what Secretary of State Blinken was saying, and that is reflective of also of the president's view, that we will continue to defend our national interests, impose costs for Russian government actions that seek to harm our sovereignty. That was also the message around the call that the president had with President Putin just a few weeks ago. We want to move to a more stable and predictable place, but we also, when we announced our sanctions, we left in there maximum optionality to put in place additional actions should their actions warrant. No one wants to get to that point, but we reserve that right should we decide it's warranted.